friends, welcome back to my kitchen. If you're new here, my name is Jen. I do cooking, canning, and food preservation videos every week, and sometimes I post garden vlogs too. If that seems like the sort of content that you'd be into, I hope that you'll consider sticking around and subscribing to the channel. And speaking of new subscribers, we just recently had an influx of a bunch of new subscribers to the channel, and I just wanted to take a second and tell you guys how much I value you being here, and I appreciate you subscribing to the channel, and I'm glad that you decided to join me in my kitchen. Today we're going to be making lasagna soup. Now my family really loves lasagna, and I do have a recipe for how I make lasagna, and I will post a little card in the upper corner here if you're interested in checking that out. But sometimes you just don't have time to make lasagna from scratch and make your own sauce. And for me, lasagna soup is just a fantastic little shortcut to that. This recipe only takes about 30 or 35 minutes to pull together. So let me show you how I make this. Now, if you're new here, I do cook for a very large family. I cook for a family of 6 adults, so I always double my recipes. I also am a big fan of leftovers. So if you do not need as much lasagna soup as I am making today, just cut all of the measurements in half from the recipe that I list in the description box below. Now I'm starting off with 2 pounds of Italian sausage. You can use mild or spicy, whichever you prefer. And I did have some ground beef left in the refrigerator from something I cooked a night or two ago. So I just decided why not go ahead and throw that in there too. It just makes for a meatier soup at the end, but you can omit the hamburger if you don't have hamburger, or if you don't have Italian sausage, just use hamburger. That's perfectly acceptable. I'm just going to go ahead and let this brown in my pan. And I have this on a pretty high heat. In fact, I think I have this as high as my burner will go because I want to make sure that beef and that sausage gets browned up really nicely. And then I'm going to take my handy dandy potato masher, as I always do, and use that to break this down even further so there are no really big chunks of beef or sausage. This also helps make sure that all the seasonings from the sausage gets distributed around with the hamburger meat if you are also adding hamburger to this recipe. Now, if you were just using hamburger, I would suggest at this point that you add some Italian seasonings to it, some of the same things that you might find in Italian sausage. Once my hamburger meat and my sausage is browned up nicely, I'm going to go ahead and season that with some salt and pepper. I'm not going to tell you how much because everybody has different taste buds, and what works for me may not work for you. So, like I always say, season with your soul. Put however much in there you like. Once everything is cooked thoroughly, I'm going to go ahead and remove all of this meat to a strainer that's sitting inside of a bowl. I do not want all of this excess grease floating around in my soup, and it is of my opinion that this is the easiest way to do this without making a mess all over your kitchen or risking spilling this grease down your sink because nobody needs a clogged drain right before Christmas. So just remove all of the meat from the pan. Now, if you're going to do this in one pan, which I had initially started off thinking I was going to do, you just drain off the rest of your grease after you get all of your meat out of your pan. I have this problem, and you will see the longer you stay on this channel, I always need a bigger bowl. I always need a bigger pan. So I ended up just draining my meat and swapping to my big old lunch lady pan. If you grew up eating a lot of leftovers, you know when this big pan comes out, you're going to be eating whatever it is that mom cooked for a couple of days at least. So this time it's lasagna soup. So I just added a little bit of olive oil to this fresh pan, and I put 2 large yellow onions that I diced up, and I just sauteed them around until they started to be a little translucent, and I added about 6 or 7 garlic cloves. And I'm just going to saute this on medium heat until the garlic becomes fragrant. You don't want to burn your garlic and you don't want to burn your onions. And if you don't have one of those fancy garlic presses like I was using in the very beginning, it's fine. Just chop your garlic up really small. If you don't have fresh garlic and all you have is garlic, use that. If you don't have any fresh or garlic, then use garlic powder. It is all about cooking with what you have. So to my garlic and my onions, I'm adding about 4 tablespoons of tomato paste, and I'm just going to saute that around a little bit to get the kind of canned or tinny flavor off of that tomato paste. You'll notice at this point I did turn the heat down because I don't want to burn my tomato paste. I just want to kind of incorporate it with the onions and garlic and get it heated up and brought to temperature. And then I'm going to start adding in the rest of the components of this lasagna soup. I'm using 3 of the medium-sized jars of marinara sauce. I'm just using store-bought. I do have some homemade marinara sauce that I made over the summer and canned up, but I did it in small jars for making pizza. And if I used all of that up, then I would have none for pizza later. So I'm just using store-bought, which is perfectly fine. Once I get my marinara sauce in my big pot, I'm going to go ahead and add 2 quarts of chicken stock. I made this over the summer too, and I just recently made some turkey broth out of the leftover turkey from Thanksgiving, and I wanted to kind of move through this chicken stock since it was the oldest thing on my pantry shelf. You can use beef stock here, you can use vegetable stock. If you don't have any of that, you can just add water. That's fine. The stock does add a little more flavor to your soup, so just keep that in mind. We're going to go ahead and move on to adding our seasonings to our soup. And again, I'm not going to give you measurements. I will write suggested measurements with the recipe in the box below, but you can add to it, you can take away from it. A recipe is just a guideline unless you're baking. So I added some red pepper flake, and then I'm going to add some oregano and some basil. If you have fresh, that would be better, but of those 2 things, I only had dried, so I am just making do with what I have. I did, however, have some fresh parsley, so I chopped up about half a bunch of fresh parsley at the very beginning, and I'm going to add about half of that to the soup, and I'm going to reserve about half of that back for the cheese topping that goes on top of your soup. Going to give that a really good stir, make sure everything's incorporated, and then at this point, add your meat back to your soup. Give this a nice stir, make sure the meat is all mixed in. It's not going to be very thick at this point, but don't worry, when you add your pasta, that all changes. I'm going to put a lid on that and let that simmer for a little while I do the cheese topping. For this mixture, it is 2 cups of mozzarella, 1 cup of Parmesan cheese, and about 20 ounces of ricotta cheese. Now you can adjust those measurements. If you do not need this much, please cut all of those measurements in half. Like I said, I'm cooking for a family of 6 adults. They're all very hearty eaters, and I wanted to make sure that I had enough of this for the leftovers the next day. Now I keep the seasoning on this fairly basic. The soup itself is very flavorful, and this is just like a little creamy topping that melts over the top of your soup. So I didn't really want it to be overpowering on its own. But by all means, if you would like this to taste like garlic, add some garlic powder to it. You can put whatever you want in this. Red pepper flake would probably be really good if you like spicy food. But I just added some black pepper and the rest of my fresh parsley. I didn't add any salt because cheese itself is already pretty salty, but you can taste it at this point. Everything here is fine to taste. It doesn't need cooking or anything. So taste it and see if that is salty enough for you. And if not, add a little bit of salt. It's fine. Once I get this all mixed together really well, I'm going to just cover it with some plastic wrap and put it in the refrigerator while my soup finishes up. Now we're moving back over to our soup, and this is the last step for this. When your soup broth comes up to a boil or almost to a boil, all I'm going to do is take some just regular old lasagna noodles and break them up into smaller pieces. They don't have to be perfect, and I'm going to be honest with you, these lasagna noodles this go around were like kind of hard. They hurt my fingers. I know some grocery stores sell lasagna noodles like this that are already in little small sizes. So if you can find those, use those. Those would be great. But I just went through about a box and a half for this amount of soup and broke all of the noodles into slightly larger than bite-sized pieces. I'm going to stir it up really well to make sure none of the pasta is stuck to the bottom. I'm going to press the pasta down so everybody is submerged under the liquid and cook evenly. And then I'm just going to put a lid on this and let this simmer for about 10 or 15 minutes. You want to come back every so often and give this a stir because as the starch comes out of the pasta, the soup is going to thicken substantially. And if any of this pasta gets stuck to the bottom of the pot at this point, it's just going to burn and stick onto your pan. So Just stir it up every so often, and I'm only going to cook this to al dente because I'd like to have leftovers, and this pasta is going to continue to absorb liquid. In fact, the next day it was basically like deconstructed lasagna. So you can cook them all the way through if you don't want leftovers, but I suggest if you want leftovers, just cook them al dente. And then this last step is totally optional, but I'm adding about 4 cups of baby spinach. I don't know about you guys, but any chance I get to sneak some vegetables into my family, I'm absolutely going to do that. So add spinach if you like. We're not going to cook this for a long time. I'm just going to tuck this all down in the soup, put the lid on, and shut the heat off, and just let the spinach wilt down a little bit. And the only thing left to do at this point is to serve up this soup. This is so good. It is perfect for a winter dinner. This will warm you all the way through. It is thick and rich and hearty. And like I said, it only takes 30 minutes to put this soup together, give or take. And you feel like you've made just this fancy lasagna. It has all of the same elements as a lasagna does, but it's in a comforting little bowl. So I'm going to fill my bowl up. I'm going to put a nice sized dollop of that ricotta, mozzarella, parmesan mixture. And that is it, folks. A yummy dinner that did not take you very long at all. So I really hope that you'll give this recipe a try, or if you just want a regular lasagna, again, I'll leave a link to my lasagna video. If you do give this soup a try, or you've already tried this soup, leave me a comment down below and let me know what you think about this. Until next time, friends, happy cooking.